Hey guys, Sharpend here. In this video we're going to remake Laxcity's melody loops. They sound something like this. So if you got a chance to check out Laxcity's music or maybe his Splice sample pack, then you probably heard this type of melody loops. These sort of like keys loops, and then on top of them he adds some vocal chops and some atmospheric elements, and that's what we're going to recreate today. It may seem complicated by the amount of layers, but it's fairly simple. The first step is selecting an E-piano sound. I chose this one, which is an E-piano that I've made in a previous tutorial, so you can check it out. And then you need a chord progression. So here's mine. As you can hear, it's very repetitive and it's very catchy. And that's because even though it looks super complicated, it's just three chords. We have C major here, we have D major, and then E minor. And then the second time that this progression repeats, we have C major again, D major, and G major. So how did this get so complicated? Well, what you want to do, and what Laxcity does in these sort of loops, is that he adds a lot of additional notes and plays a lot with the chords. So I just took the scale, which is G major, and I just added a bunch of notes like here. All of these top notes aren't part of the chord, but I've added them to add some melody and some movement. Again, all of these notes, and here we switch to another chord. So again, we add the chord, and then I've added one note here, one note there, just to add some variation. And here we have just the E minor chord on its own. It's a -7 because it has D. And then for this part, it was at the start just like empty space. So in order to add some variation, I just took the chord that leads to E, the fifth chord for E, which is B major. In this case it's a B minor because I wanted to keep it in the scale. So I've just added it, and then I've just taken this chord and just transposed it up and down and played with it. So here we have like these notes transposed up an octave, and here we have G transposed back down and D transposed an octave below. You just want to play with your with the same notes of the same chord in a rhythmic pattern so that you can get more interesting results and some more rhythm. So the same thing goes here. I just added different melodic notes to add some variation. And again, same thing goes here. We end on the G major chord. So I've added the fifth of G major so we can lead back into it, which is D major. And then it goes back into G, and it just changes the octaves placement of the same notes in the chord. So you get something like this, which leads us back into C because G is the fifth of C. So after you have your keys melody, chord progression, just add some delay to your keys. I'm high passing it by quite a bit so that you don't get all of the muddy low end. And then I'm routing it to another mixer track that has some guitar rig reverb with a lot of high passing as well so that it doesn't get muddy. Let's hear it on its own. It's just there to add some atmospheres in the back. And then there's the bass. So in the melody loops that Laxcity makes, usually uses just a sine wave, and it makes it fairly simple, just like following the chords notes, but I've decided to make it a bit more complex. I wanted to create a bass that follows a lot of different pitch bending, so I've made it maximum polyphony only 1, and then I've set it to mono and to portamento so that it slides between notes. And I've increased the slide speed to be pretty long, so we get something like this. And all of these notes falling down just adds a nice touch to this note that just sort of slides back into these notes. So basically I've created a very bouncy bass that goes through a lot of different pitch bending, and it makes it sound a bit more interesting in my opinion. So here's how it would sound with the keys. And then the main element that Laxcity adds is some vocal chops. So I've taken a bunch of vocals and pitched them up to my scale, which is G major. Here's how they sound on their own, and once you add some effects, so I've added some autotune on the fastest speed as possible so that I get a very distinct sound to them that sounds very catchy. And then I've added some EQ. The vocals in these melody loops sounds very muffled so that they don't have a lot of high end. And then some delay. And for some more atmosphere, I've added some reverb on 50% wet, 2.5 seconds. Nothing too interesting, it just adds some ambience to our vocal chops. And then together with the keys and the bass, you get already a very nice foundation. And then there are a couple of other things that you can add. So usually in his melody loops, there's also a tiny bit of atmospheric like piano on top. So in this case, I just made a piano arpeggio. It just repeats the same notes. It's the first chord from the scale with a bunch of, just like the seventh added on top. So you get this very nice arpeggio. And then once you add some EQ to remove the lows, some delay that has some reverb as well, and an additional reverb on top to make it a bit more atmospheric and in the back, you get a very nice and smooth piano sound. And then I've added another piano where I just took the volume envelope and added some attacks so that it takes some time for the piano notes to start playing. And I've just added a bunch of notes from the scale all over the place in different rhythms, just to create some more variation. And I've added into it a lot of reverb, 13 seconds on 100% wet. And again, removing just the lows, so I get sort of like an evolving piano sound. So we have the piano arp, which is consistent. It keeps playing the same notes throughout the entire loop, but this sort of piano pad just plays short different notes at different places that adds a nice touch and variation to our piano. And as you can hear, it's mixed very much in the back because I don't want it to overpower the melodic content of our vocal chops. And then this is optional, I've added a synth lead on top as well. The main thing that I did here is I used a lot of the slide notes in FL Studio, like all of this is just slides, to create sort of like a whistly sound. And then I've made it even more whistly by adding some vibrato and some volume modulation, some tremolo, and then a lot of reverb to make it sound a bit more in the back. So altogether you get this sound with the vocal chops. And one final touch that you can add is just some vinyl crackle. I've high passed it and reduced some of the very highs, since this loop is very muffled and focused on the low frequencies. And that way you can get a very nice sounding loop. And then I've added a different variation here, where I've used a different synth for the keys patch. So in this case, I've used the 3x oscillator. I've just used a bunch of sine waves. One sine wave is an octave above the two others, and it's mixed at 50% volume. And then I've added a tiny bit of attack, no sustain, some release, and a lot of decay to our volume envelope, so that you get sort of like an E-piano sound that doesn't sound too clicky. And you can also add some pitch modulation if you'd like, just a very short envelope that goes up and then back down to add some clickiness, but it's up to you. I've decided to remove it. And the main difference here is that I've used slide notes. So in the E-piano version, I didn't use any slide notes, but in here I've added a bunch of slide notes here. So let's hear it. So the main difference that this makes is that when you play entire chords by sliding them, you get interesting results. But if you want to slide entire chords, then make sure to use different MIDI channels, because if you use, like, for example, this note to slide from B to E, it's going to slide all of the green notes into E. So that's why you need, if you have a chord with 4 notes, you need 4 different colors, like here, so that I can slide F sharp into G, and A into B, and B into D, so that I can get the E minor 7 chord that I want. And you can always increase the slide times if you're looking for a more interesting sound as well. It's really up to you, and that way you can add a tiny bit of variation to your sound. It does sound a bit different from an E-piano, but you can fix that, in my opinion, by just adding some guitar amplifier simulator to add some sort of like an E-piano sound. So you get this sound instead. Which in my opinion is also an interesting take on the more classic E-piano sound. And that is pretty much it. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below what subject do you want me to cover up next time.